Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mob Fireside Chat. As you can see, we're trying to get on a regular schedule here on the channel, something those of you who have been with us for a while know is a new thing. Like what we're doing here, we publish weekly stories over at the Button Guys of the New York Mafia, the source for all of our video stories on the channel. Every Friday, you can read something new, unique, and original at the Button Guys website. For example, this past Friday, we posted up a story about a top hood named Big Freddie Bertolotti, who was declared a public enemy in the city of New York. We also wrote about a guy named Charlie Brush Dangara, who was an original member of the old Magaddino family and who eventually turned over his crew to Joseph N. Gallo. So head on over to the NewYorkMafia.com and sign up today so you don't miss our next new story. And please let us know your thoughts about today's episode in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next video. Today, we're going to share a story about a wolf who lived in Buffalo, a Sicilian wolf who felt much more at home making his lair in the city instead of the vast countryside. His name was Frederico Randaccio, also known as Lupo the Wolf. Enjoy. Frederico Gabriele Randaccio, his true name, was born on July 1st, 1907 in Palermo, Sicily. He immigrated to the U.S. when he was 3 years old with his parents and siblings. The family settled in the Buffalo, New York area. Freddie was known by different names, including Lupo, Freddie Lupo, Lupo the Wolf, Frederico Randacci, Frederico Fassi, Frederick Randazzo, or 48 other name variations and street aliases federal authorities attributed to him. In 1920, when he was just 13 years old, Lupo was picked up for being a truant and charged with juvenile delinquency. Shortly thereafter, he was nabbed a second time for the same charges. These events were pivotal moments in young Freddie's life because from that moment forward, he made the fateful decision to drop out of grade school altogether. He would cast his dark brown, wolf-like eyes towards the street life. It was a chosen lifestyle for which young Randaccio seemed like a natural fit. Early photographs of him show a darkly handsome man who had the darkest of eyes, which were almost black in color. He indeed resembled a wolf physically and in his stealth and temperament. It's no wonder that he quickly gained the moniker of Lupo, which in Sicilian literally means wolf. Lupo the Wolf, Freddie the Wolf, Freddie Lupo, or just plain Lupo would become his lifelong nicknames, and they suited him perfectly. His reputation as a top strong-arm man, capable enforcer, and competent killer for Buffalo's underworld would soon precede him everywhere he went. Not one to be trifled with, even the most vicious hoodlums across the city would give a wide berth when Lupo the Wolf was around. Early in his life, Freddie befriended several other young, tough Italian hooligans, and together they started committing petty crimes. They soon came to the attention of the DiCarlo gang, a fast-growing band of like-minded hoods making a notorious name for themselves on the streets of Buffalo's Italian section as they fought for control of the local burglary, bootleg, extortion, and gambling rackets. The gang was headed by Giuseppe DiCarlo, who had a similar scary mafia moniker of Joe the Wolf, and his racketeer brother Sam DiCarlo. Joe the Wolf DiCarlo was eventually named Buffalo's public enemy #1. He later received so much bad press and became so notorious that he was actually banished by a judge from the city limits. He and his brother would later relocate to Youngstown, Ohio and Miami, Florida, but while they were operating in Buffalo, they both left their mark on the city's underworld. The fledgling young hoods who gathered around them would one day gain infamy in the city of Buffalo and Niagara Falls in their own right. Guys with names like Pasquale, Patty Titters, Notarelli, Rosario, Roy, Carlisi, Giovanni, Johnny Cammelleri, Paolo, Bobby Ross, Briandi, Daniel Boots Sansanese, Anthony Lucky Perna, and the Pieri brothers, future top mafiosi, one and all. During his lifetime, Lupo piled up a long yellow sheet with all the typical charges one would expect from any ambitious top mafioso, including suspicion of murder. He also had arrests for gambling, federal liquor law violations, disorderly conduct, assault, carrying a concealed weapon, felonious assault, robbery, parole violation, alien registration and deportation proceedings, armed robbery, and conspiracy. But make no mistake, because although he would indeed garner more than his fair share of pinches, Freddie Lupo was a low-key, shrewd, and calculating mafioso of the first order, so much so that none other than the longtime overlord of the Buffalo Niagara Falls Mafia Brigada would handpick Randaccio as his number 2 man, his underboss. It was a position that Freddie would execute unfailingly, no pun intended, for years to come. He would be Stefano Magaddino's whip over the entire membership of the Buffalo family for upwards of a decade. Known as a top enforcer, few stepped out of line knowing that Lupo the Wolf was waiting in the wings. Randaccio had assumed the position held by the previous underboss of the family, Vito Domiano, also known as Buck Jones, a highly respected tough guy hoodlum who served Magaddino for years. Upon Domiano's death from natural causes, his protege, Lupo Randaccio, stepped up to fill the void. Lupo would be an extremely hands-on type underboss, out on the streets with his men. He was not a shrinking violet by any means. And because of those legitimate hoodlum ways, he was looked upon favorably by the membership and highly respected for his management style. He was a hoodlum's hoodlum. It is one of the highest respects that one mafioso can call another mafioso, and that is who Freddie Lupo seems to have been. Lupo was deeply enmeshed in most street rackets, but perhaps most telling and certainly most appropriate to his nickname was his affinity to engage in the loan shark business. Better known to wise guys as shylocking, Lupo reveled in the usurious money-lending trade, and true to his moniker of the Wolf, he was indeed wolf-like in his methods of operation. In approximately 1962 or 1963, a con man and fraudster approached the FBI claiming to have vital information they might be interested in. He wanted to trade the information in exchange for his freedom from a large check-kiting scheme he had perpetrated around the Buffalo area. He claimed that he had approached several wise guys for a loan. They in turn referred him to a Freddie the Wolf, whom he then met in a bar named PANARO'S Lounge. PANARO'S Lounge was a notorious mob hangout on the west side of Buffalo. It was owned by Buffalo soldier Robert Bobby Snowball Panaro. According to the con man, the day he visited PANARO'S, there were 4 or 5 Italian hoodlums there, but he was introduced to Lupo. He said Lupo reached into his pants pocket and handed over $10,000 in cash, and reportedly told him that in 30 days' time he had to return $15,000 for the loan. This is a whopping 50% vigorish in a mere month. That equates to a 600% annual interest rate, an unconscionable rate even by Mafia loan shark standards. The highest rate that is typically charged is 5% weekly or 260% annually, and that is considered very steep. So this gives you a little idea of just how steep Lupo's rates could be. Wolf-like is putting it mildly. Among Lupo's closest allies and loyal soldiers directly with him were some of the most important of this family's membership. The previously mentioned Patty Notarelli was a close aide and was big in the numbers business. So was Bobby Ross Briandi, who also doubled as an enforcer. Other soldiers he directly partnered with included gambling operators Eddie Scilia and Joe Fino, who oversaw one of the bigger booking networks this crew ran. Another ally was loan shark Benedetto Benny Spano, who was one of the larger shylocks in the city, and also Danny Boots Sansanese, who was a top strong-arm man enforcing Randaccio's dictates. Because of the tremendous scrutiny and heat he started receiving as the number 2 guy of the Buffalo mob, Randaccio feared FBI surveillance. By 1960 or so, he started taking precautions and countermeasures against a probe by law enforcement into his activities and that of his associates. Some things he implemented to deflect any feds noseying around was to designate soldier Freddie Mogavero, a very close and trusted top aide of his, to become his message drop and the primary contact for any member of the Brigada who needed to reach out to Lupo for any reason. He also advised his men not to use their own home telephones, nor call his home phone to reach him. If anyone needed to contact him, Lupo instructed them to either visit Mogavero at one of his Texaco gas stations or leave a message in some manner with Mogavero, who in turn would contact the underboss. Side note, once agents established that Mogavero was the main contact for the underboss, the FBI decided to install a bug in the office at one of his gas stations. Within weeks of its installation, the feds got an earful as to how important and well-placed Freddie Mogavero actually was. He was indeed a sworn soldier of the family and the closest aide and confidant to Lupo, in addition to being his personal driver and bodyguard. But Mogavero turned out to be so much more than that. It seems that Mogavero had close personal contacts to high-ranking detectives and police officials in the Buffalo Police Department, as well as various city councilmen, Buffalo City lawyers, and other important political figures. So he was being utilized not only as a contact man for the underboss, but also for the entire Buffalo membership anytime they needed a favor or wanted to get something done at the highest levels of local government. It was another eye-opener for the FBI to see the pervasive corruption playing out before them as the mob and City Hall played footsie together. Lupo listed himself as a partner in the Delaware Vending Company, a firm that distributed jukebox, cigarette machines, pinball machines, and other coin-operated games to Buffalo area bars and taverns, diners, storefronts, and so forth. He was also alleged to have a piece of several neighborhood taverns, as well as other ownership interests through several underlings and crew members. Like a good big brother, Lupo also made sure to take care of his little brother Vic by seeing to it that he was installed in a cushy, well-paying job as the primary business agent of the Hod Carriers and Common Laborers Union Local 210, a Magaddino-controlled union. Victor Randaccio would serve as a top union official for many years. He was also a documented soldier in their mafia family, serving directly under Big Brother Freddy. Victor shared control with another mob underling by the name of San Bon Giovanni, who was also an official of Local 210. Lupo became a key member of a mafia family that had sprawling control over all of upstate New York, which included the areas of western Buffalo, Niagara Falls, Utica, Syracuse, Erie, Pennsylvania, parts of Canada, such as Hamilton, Ontario, and nearly everything in between. The city of Rochester had also come under their influence until the faction later broke away from the Brigada in the late 1950s. Besides his responsibility of overseeing the entire membership on behalf of boss Steve Magaddino, Lupo himself oversaw a personal crew, which was one of the largest regimes in the Brigada. Over the years, he was known to have had his polished, manicured fingers in many racket pies, both legal and illegal. A good example of his reach and that of the family at large was one such side deal that Freddie Lupo was partnered in with his brother Vic, Bon Giovanni, Mogavero, and Eddie Scilia. They negotiated the purchase of 600 acres of land near East Aurora, New York, and a property development deal with plans to build a sprawling $20 million shopping plaza and homes adjacent to the plaza on the same property. This deal fell into their lap through Victor Randaccio's influence and control over Laborers Local 210, which was pivotal to any construction taking place by developers. In essence, the group shoehorned themselves into this development deal and made sure to financially benefit from any project that went forward. From the late 1950s to the early 1960s, there had been a series of murders of small-time hoodlums in the Buffalo area that drew the attention of law enforcement. And of course, as underboss, Randaccio would have supervised the successful execution of those hits. But it was not until 1961 that Randaccio and his boss, Stefano Magaddino, really came to the attention of both local and federal authorities. In November 1961, the charred remains of Alberto Aguici were found in a cornfield outside Rochester. Aguici was a Sicilian national, a baker by trade, and a well-known heroin dealer. He had been found trussed up gangland style. He was severely beaten with pounds of flesh carved from his body before he was doused with gasoline and set on fire. Aguici and his brother Vito had figured prominently into a massive international narcotics conspiracy that tied Buffalo's Magaddino family into New York City's Genovese and Lucchese mobs, among others. Both men had been named in an indictment originating out of the Southern District of Manhattan, accusing them of being drug smugglers and couriers entrusted with the safe transport of multi-kilo heroin loads brought across the Canadian-U.S. border for further distribution among mafia affiliates in several cities. This was the same probe that nabbed Vito Genovese, John Big John Ormento, Carmine Lilo Galante, and many other top mafioso. Held at the Tombs in Lower Manhattan after his arrest, Vito Aguici started making rumblings that the old man, meaning Magaddino, had better make arrangements to pay for his lawyer as well as care for his wife and kids while he was in jail awaiting trial, or else. This veiled threat soon became overt threats to spill the beans to the Federal Bureau of Narcotics if help was not forthcoming ASAP from Magaddino, whom the brothers considered responsible for their plight since the Aguecis worked for the Buffalo crew. Albert Agueci received Magaddino's answer in that lonely cornfield that fateful evening. Needless to say, his brother Vito chose to clam up and no longer wanted to be released on bail. Who could blame him? These incidents, as well as informer Joe Valachi's 1963 testimony about the Buffalo mob and narcotics dealing, of which Valachi was also a part, helped increase law enforcement pressure on the Magaddino Brigada. Police soon ramped up and started a concerted campaign of harassment against Buffalo's wise guys. A good example of this was in 1967 when police raided PANARO'S lounge one evening, interrupting a major mafia meeting of the Brigada. All 36 alleged mafia figures present were arrested, hauled into police headquarters, and charged with consorting with known criminals. The arrest made the front pages in all the newspapers. Among those nabbed were no less than the boss himself and his second-in-command, Lupo Randaccio. Magaddino became incensed when Lupo lost his cool, flying into a rage against the raiding officers. He had cursed at them until the boss gave him the evil eye and stated to the effect, "Why don't you just sit back and relax?" At which time Randaccio caught himself and clammed up. Although the charges were minor in nature, Lupo was embarrassed at the loss of face to have been the one to set up the meeting, only to have it raided while his superior and so many key members were in attendance. In his underworld career, Randaccio was thought to have risen from a soldato or soldier to a capo post by the 1940s. He later became the recognized official underboss, a position he held from the 1950s to the late 1960s. In the same year of the PANARO raid, Lupo was convicted along with several family minions on federal conspiracy charges and jailed for 20 years. After serving approximately 12 years behind bars, he made parole in June of 1979. Freddie Lupo had the dubious honor of having figured into the very first case ever brought where law enforcement relocated a potential witness. The case helped formulate the Witness Protection Program, or WITSEC, which is responsible for the safekeeping of mob informants who go against the organization. The first informant to ever go into the program was a half-assed armed robber and all-around thief named Pascal Patty Calabrese of Buffalo. He was a sometime hang-around of various Magaddino family members and an independent who pulled several daring robberies that brought him to the attention of the mob. They subsequently started utilizing him for more heists, with other big-money robberies planned for the future, but he had gotten arrested for a major heist. While sitting in jail and pondering his bleak future, Calabrese realized that he could use his new mafia friends to barter for his freedom, and turned informant. This would be the beginning of the end for Randaccio, Petty Notarelli, and several other wise guys. Once he was debriefed by the police, and federal agents realized the scope of his information and who Calabrese could tag with his testimony, they quickly scooped up him, his girlfriend, and her small child and whisked them away to an undisclosed location for safekeeping. This event was the start of the program that, to this day, has safely housed 98% of the program's informants, both before and after they testify in open court. Patty Calabrese became pivotal in the arrests, subsequent courtroom testimony, convictions, and imprisonment of the feared Underboss and his men. Side note, there came a point in time, approximately 1968 or so, that many members of the Brigada started verbally throwing daggers at Randaccio. For at least a year or two before that, there had been an increased onslaught of federal law enforcement scrutiny, crackdowns, and arrests of family members. It was felt by some that the high-profile federal case Lupo was involved with, as well as his in-your-face hoodlum style of operating while he was on the streets, renewed the vigor of local and federal law enforcement to probe deeper into the Magaddino empire than it ever had before. Whether that's true or not was never established. There was also speculation long after Lupo the Wolf had been knocked back down to a soldier status that it took his imprisonment of 20 years for Steve Magaddino to finally officially replace him. The prevailing wisdom, true or not, was that Magaddino was actually somewhat hesitant to insult Randaccio with a demotion or risk an open conflict with him. While on the street, Lupo was thought to have been so very powerful, and his large regime of followers so loyal to him, that Magaddino didn't want to risk an all-out gang war for control of the family. So he just let him operate unimpeded until Randaccio was finally jailed, giving Magaddino a valid reason to replace him. Many say that by the early 1960s, Lupo was just giving the boss lip service to appease his oversized ego, and that in fact Randaccio was shorting the envelopes he was supposed to be collecting on Magaddino's behalf. In essence, Lupo was controlling the streets, and Magaddino was largely unaware of the true amounts of racket money being generated weekly and monthly. It's not inconceivable to imagine either. Maybe he was stiffing his boss, maybe he wasn't, but as the official Buffalo family underboss, and a very deadly guy at that, it's not hard to imagine there were too many guys willing to openly challenge Lupo about it. Randaccio went into federal prison with his head up, and he served his time quietly like the true Cosa Nostra soldado that he always was. With his eventual release from jail, he returned home and just as quietly settled back into civilian life. But a lot had changed since his days on the street, an awful lot. His longtime capo, the family's representante, Steve Magaddino, had since been deposed from his exalted position at the summit of their brigada. Magaddino had ruled with an iron fist for over 50 years, but his miserly, tight-fisted ways with a buck and his repeated lies to the rank-and-file membership about how the family had no money in its coffers finally came back to bite him in the ass. It was shortly after Randaccio's jailing in the late fall of 1967 that Magaddino told the men there would be no Christmas envelopes forthcoming to his loyal capo regimes and soldiers that holiday season because the brigada was basically broke. The wily old mafioso had used the arrests and legal fees spent on Freddie's case as one of the reasons, among others, for his excuses of claiming poverty. The men were not happy, to say the least, especially after having kicked up fat tribute payments to the hierarchy that entire year. The Magaddino family had vast wealth from lucrative underworld operations in just about every single racket imaginable. A huge horse and sports bookmaking network, a massive numbers ticket lottery and traditional policy operation that spanned across the upstate area, extensive loan sharking shakedowns and strong-arm extortions, control of several key teamsters and laborers' union locals, international heroin trafficking from Europe through Canada into Buffalo, truck hijackings, counterfeiting United States currency, robbery and burglary gangs that specialized in stolen stocks and securities, and much, much more. The breadth of this brigada's criminal activities was so far-flung that the thought of the family not having a slush fund for the holidays was an almost unbelievably hard pill for the members to swallow. But they did. They trusted their boss, and if he said there was no money, then there was no money. That following year, in November 1968, the House of Cards came falling down. In coordinated early morning raids, local, state, and federal law enforcement targeted Magaddino's personal gambling operations. Armed with search and arrest warrants, police raided Steve Magaddino's home, that of his son Peter, the Magaddino funeral home, which was the base of operations, and several other key locations. What authorities found was shocking and eye-opening to both police and the underworld. During the search of the Magaddino home, police discovered a suitcase packed with a small fortune of neatly stacked and rubber-banded $10,000 bundles of U.S. currency. They found more stashes of money in a file cabinet at the funeral home, and the bulk of it in a trunk in the attic of his son Peter's home. When it was all tallied up back at police headquarters, it totaled over $500,000 in cold cash. That's a lot of loot today, but remember that this was back in 1968 when $500,000 was truly $500,000. The news was, of course, splashed across the local tabloids for all to read. Father and son were arrested by the FBI for interstate bookmaking and conspiracy, and the money was seized as evidence. But the criminal charges proved to be the least of the old man's problems. With the newfound knowledge that their trusted, longtime boss had been cheating his men all along out of their fair share of the family's wealth, within months there was an internal insurrection. The membership quickly split into several different factions and stated they no longer recognized Magaddino as the family leader. This was to become a major crack across the brigada's previously united, proud rank and file. It would also lead to some bloodshed as the various capo regimes jockeyed for position and power within the splintered family. It can be argued that from this point forward, the Magaddino family of Cosa Nostra never regained the same status and unified power that they once held. For his part, having been jailed from almost the outset of all this underworld drama from mid-1967 forward, Freddy Randaccio sat on ice in federal prison watching from the sidelines. As the underboss, it's probable he was consulted as to his opinion about what was happening, but regardless of any vote he may have cast, there wasn't anything he could do more than maybe send out a few messages one way or the other to trusted underlings. After much controversy, treachery, and intrigue between competing mafiosi, the family leadership would finally pass to a low-key soldier named Salvatore Sam the Farmer Frangiamore. Eventually, the mantle of power was permanently granted to a veteran member named Joseph Leadpipe Joe Todaro Sr. He was thought to have served as the boss from approximately 1984 until his death in 2006, a 22-year run. Todaro had a long tenure and was arguably one of the smarter and savvier mafiosi to have ever come out of northern New York State. He was an accomplished businessman who became a multimillionaire operating a string of highly successful La Nova pizzerias. Todaro later expanded into the nationwide distribution of his wildly popular La Nova chicken wings that are carried in eateries and food stores from coast to coast. He had started out as a successful gambler and bookmaker and dabbled in other rackets as well. But Todaro was savvy and intelligent enough to limit his underworld activities as well as his public exposure, frustrating law enforcement's best efforts to nab him. But all these underworld machinations meant little to our Lupo the Wolf. After his release on parole from behind prison walls, Randaccio never again enjoyed the high status or power he once yielded during Steve Magaddino's reign. Not that he necessarily even sought it out any longer. He had served well over a decade in jail, and that will certainly take the starch out of even the most devout hoodlums. Lupo was still a very respected member of an internationally recognized network of arguably the most accomplished criminals on the face of the planet. But his time had passed, as it does for all of us. He, at least, was smart enough to know it. If he did keep his hand in any rackets in order to generate some income for himself, and there's no doubt that he probably did, Lupo Randaccio was savvy enough to understand that his name and face were now on Front Street with the FBI and Buffalo's organized crime racket squad. If the rumors were true that he had indeed skimmed a lot of cash off the top during his days with Steve Magaddino, hopefully Lupo had stashed a ton of it away for a racketeer's rainy day, because he didn't seem to have struggled financially in his later years. He continued to associate in a surreptitious way with a few of his most trusted former associates. He may have maintained a small Shylock book with some preferred customers, or had a piece of a small bookmaking business with a partner or two. He may have operated both. But whatever he did or didn't do in his later years, he would never again draw the attention of the law. He lived a quiet life, and by all accounts enjoyed his golden years, as they say. Long retired, and in keeping with that old adage that only the good die young, Frederico Randaccio died on October 4, 2004, at the very respectable old age of 97. In his long lifetime, he had seen it all. Freddie had seen them come, and Freddie had seen them go. But in the end, this cagey old mafioso had outlived them all. Lupo had stayed true to his moniker as the shrewd and wily underworld wolf that he indeed had always been. And that's the end of our story about Lupo the Wolf. If you enjoyed this story, head on over to thenewyorkmafia.com and read our in-depth story on the Magaddino family and many other regimes and families throughout the country, some you may not know much about. Plus, as always, you can browse the most comprehensive library of organized crime stories on the internet, from the well-known to the little-known, who made up the backbone of the Brigadas. But before you do that, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode of Mob Fireside Chat. And if you have an idea for a story of mafioso you would like to see on Mob Fireside Chat, drop your suggestion in the comments or email us at nymstaff@gmail.com. We might already have a story in our library. Thank you for watching. Until next time.